Hello. So in this video we are going to solve task 2 of this project on variadic functions. So it says we should write a function that prints strings followed by a new line. So this is the prototype. So as you can see, it takes in what? A separator, which is a parameter here, and also the variable here n, which describes what the number of argument that the function is going to take. When you look at this, you know this is a variadic function, right? It says where the separator is a string to be printed between strings, and n is the number of strings passed to the function. We already know that. You are allowed to use printf. If separator is null, don't print it. So if the separator is null, you are not supposed to print the separator between the words, the strings, right? If one of the string is null, print nil instead. So print a new line at the end of the function. So let's just look at this main file here. When you look at this is what the function is being called, right? What is the first parameter? As you can see, it is what? A comma and a space. So it means this is what will be printed between each string, right? And this 2 here tells how many parameters our function is going to take. So as you can see, we have J, we also have Django here. So it means it takes these 2 parameters, right? So when you look at this, it first printed J, and then it printed the separator, which is the comma and the space, which we pass as the first argument to the function, and then the second string. Okay, so this is just what we are asked to do here. So let's open the file. So I already have the file documented. As you can see, I have Betty documented. I don't want to be wasting time documenting Betty. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is, we know that this is a variadic function, right? So what do we need to do? We need to var list, right? This is going to give us the ability to create the variable that we want to store the arguments, right? So I'm going to call it arg. Like I said in the previous videos, you can name it anything, isn't it? So now, what do we need to do? We need to start it, right? With var arg, we need to start the variadic function. So var start. So what are the argument of var start? We need to pass in the variable that holds the argument. In this case, we declare it as what? As arg. So I'll just say arg, comma what? How many arguments are inside this arg here? N arguments, because this n here holds the number of arguments, right? So we have n parameters inside this arg variable here. So I'll just pass in n, right? So what's the next thing we need to do? Before we print this argument here, before we print the parameters, we need to loop over the entire element. Isn't it? Over the entire argument, right? So, and how many arguments do we have? We have n argument. So I need to loop from 0 to what? To less than n, right? Or 1 to n, or 0 less than n, anyhow you do it, right? So I'm going to need a for loop. So before that, let me declare a variable which I'm going to use for my looping, and I'm going to name it, or I'm going to give it the type unsigned int I. Why am I giving it an unsigned int? Because I'm going to compare it with what? An unsigned n, an unsigned int called n, right? So if I leave it as int, the comparison will not work. During compilation, we'll be able to get an error. Okay, so now let's begin the loop. So I'll say for I equals to 0. So what should be the condition? We have n number of arguments, right? So I less than n. So this is going to count from 0 to n. If n is 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? It's not going to include 4, right? Because we said less than n, right? Then what again? Then we have I plus plus, isn't it? So now this is how the loop is going to work. Sorry, to loop. So what's the next thing we need to do now? We are printing strings in this case, right? We are printing string in this case. And what does var arg does? If you can remember var arg, what var arg does is it goes into this arg variable here, right? This arg variable, don't forget, it stores the arguments, right? So it goes into the variable and it fetches each argument one by one. So var arg itself is just like a loop. It fetches the arguments one by one, right? This is it, var arg, right? And then what is the variable name? The variable name is arg, right? And what is the data type of what we want var arg to fetch for us? It is a string, right? Because what we are trying to print here is a string. That is what I want var arg to fetch for us, isn't it? So I've already stated this in the previous videos that whenever you are to print string using var arg, you don't give it a data type of char. You know that when you are calling var arg, you need to pass the variable name and also the data type of what you want to fetch, right? Assuming we are trying to fetch integer values, so here I will just say int, right? But in this case, we are trying to fetch strings. So I cannot do char like this. It will not work, okay? You need to give it an asterisk. So this is how you fetch string using var arg. So the moment var arg sees this, pointer to character, it knows that you're trying to fetch what is string. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is I will create another variable of type pointer. So char asterisk, let me call it x, and then equals to. So what I just did here is that this x now is now pointing to whatever vararg is going to fetch for us. Okay, if vararg fetches the first string, it will be stored in x. If vararg fetches the second string, it will be stored in x. So this way I'll be able to print the values without having any problem. Okay, I just created an extra variable to store the values of whatever vararg is fetching for us. So now I need to check. I need to check what if vararg here fetches a null, right? What if vararg fetches a null? As you can see here, it says if one of the strings is null, print nil instead, right? So I need to consider the condition. So if one of the string, that is if vararg was able to get something that is a null, since vararg is fetching the strings now, if it is able to get something that is a null, what should we do? Right? So I'll just say if x, because x is now holding whatever vararg is going to return, right? If x is equals to null, right? So what should happen? We are told to print nil. So I'll just say printf. We are allowed to use printf, right? So they've stated that. So I'll just say printf, and then I'll print nil here. So I think this is it, right? Yeah. So print nil. So now if x is null, nil will be printed. Okay. So else, that is if x is not null. If x is not null, what should we do? We now need to print what? The value of x. Since x is not null, then print the value, print the string that x is holding, right? So I will just say printf, and then I'm printing a string, right? So it's going to be %s, isn't it? Then I will pass in what? The variable that holds the string, which is x in this case. Sorry, it's supposed to be here, which is x in this case, right? So this way I will have the string printed as far as it is not a null. So for each string that vararg fetches, it will check, is the string null? If it is not null, it will print the string, and then it will move and get the next set of string as well. That's how it will keep going. And like I said, vararg is just like a loop itself, isn't it? So what's the next thing we need to do? I think that's all. The next thing is, it says print a new line at the end of your function. So here I will just say printf, and then I will just pass in /n, right? And then here I need to end it, right? So var end. So it should be var end like this. So what should var end contains? The arg here, because it is the variable that holds the what? The argument. So I will say arg here. Okay, so now let's save and exit. All right, so let's compile the file. Let me copy the compile file by compilation command. Sorry. Okay, I've not created the test file. Sorry. So let me copy the test file. This is it. So vi2main.c, right? So I'll paste it here. So this should be hash I. All right, so let me run the compilation command again. Okay, I've not included the stdio.h header file. So let me do that in my variadic functions.h header file, right? So here I will just add stdio.h. So hash include stdio.h. So I think this should be fine now. All right, so let's run it again. Whoa, what again? Implicit declaration. Okay, I've not copied the function prototype to my variadic function.h as well. Sorry about that. So all right, so let's save and exit. Okay, so I forgot, when you look at this, we've not used the separator, right? We've not added the separator to our code. So let's do that, please. vi2. All right, so where do we need to add this separator? This separator is needed after printing each string, right? After printing each string, you need to print the separator. So this is where we need to print our separator. So, but when you look at this, our separator is not supposed to be printed after the last string. Since it is the last string, so we don't need a comma and the space. So it means for us to, or before we print the separator, we need to set a condition, right? So I need to pass in a condition. I will say if separator, as far as the separator also, here it says if separator is null, don't print it. So I will need to check for if the separator is not null, right? So if separator is not equals to null, that is one of the conditions I need to check for, right? If it is not equals to null, that is when I want to print it. And also, I'm not going to print the separator at the end of this, right? So, and what is the end of this? This is n, right? N is the number of argument, right? So if I say n here, I'm referring to the entire what? Entire argument, right? N is the exact number of the argument. So I want to print comma and the space before the last argument. And the last argument in this case is going to be what? N minus 1. So this n minus 1 is simply going to target everything less than what? Less than n. So it's not going to target including this. So it's going to print what? The comma and the space in every string before the last string. So here I need to make the adjustment here. So I will just say I less than n minus I. Sorry, n minus 1. Okay, so if separator is not equals to null, and also if the iteration, I is used for the iteration, right? If the iteration is less than n minus 1, then that is when I want to print it. I want to print the separator. If it is not less than n minus 1, if it is n, then it is not going to print the comma and the space. Okay, so here I will just put what? I will now print it. So I just say printf here, and then percentage s, and then I will pass in the separator here, right? That is what I want to print, isn't it? So the next thing we need to do is what? I think that's all. We've already considered the separator now. The separator is also a string. That's why I use percentage s, right? So let's try this. Let's compile again. Okay, it says var end string. Okay, in function print strings. Let me see. Why is it not recognizing var end? Okay, I added an extra character at the end mistakenly. Yeah. All right, so let's see now. GCC. Okay, yeah. So as you can see, it has been compiled, right? So let's run the compiled file. So as you can see, we got J and Django, right? This is exactly what we need here. As you can see, we don't have the comma and the spacing printed after the last string. So this is how to solve this problem. So thank you very much. Don't forget to add, commit, and push to GitHub, and then you can run your checks. So till we meet in our next session.